All right, thank you, Ron, and great to follow you, Ryan. Great job there. Yeah, we are going to shift gears a little bit. We've been using the hybrid word a lot. That's going to continue. Today, we're going to talk to you. I'm going to kind of shift gears mentally and kind of talking about file data and how a hybrid environment is, where things are headed for a majority of organizations. You know, it's interesting hearing Jordan and Ryan talk about some of these legacy applications and um, getting them, isolated and what was the term, strangled, something like that, right? So, and it's interesting because those directional moves are happening across a variety of areas. One of them is around file data, right? And there's a couple themes that I want to leave you with and have you think about today in the short time we have. Um, First off is around this idea of a hybrid cloud file platform. So for many of the similar reasons where organizations are, they want to shut down their data centers, they want to take advantage of the great services provided by Amazon, Azure, Google, all the big three providers, right? And there are multiple ways to do that, but there's some efficiencies to be gained by doing that. We'll talk about some of the cost benefits associated with doing so. The other trend around file data is this concept of cyber storage, right? Where the enterprise storage addresses your cybersecurity. This is part of a layered, sort of a multi-layered defense in depth strategy that is rapidly taking hold because unfortunately, cyber threats are alive and well and just getting more creative and more exciting. So let's talk about some of the data points that are driving this and where this is headed for us. Some of you some may have already started to move down this path, but the majority have not, right? So you can see from some recent research from Gartner just last month, by 2027, 60% of IO leaders are going to be implementing a hybrid cloud file deployment. That's a pretty big jump from the 20% that we're seeing today. And the other stat associated with that is, in a similar time frame, enterprises will be tripling their unstructured data capacity just across their entire environment. That's that's a big jump, right? We all know that data is continuing to grow. The amount of data just never stops. We're never going to see a headline that says data dropped in this year. That's just never going to happen because every organization has to think about dealing with this. They've got to think about scale. They've got to think about performance. They've got security. Those are, they're simple in concept. They're things we've always had to address, but it's just getting exponentially more difficult and more complex. And the old days of being able to deal with a legacy NAS system, for example, or anything that was subsequently ported to the cloud, those days are numbered because they simply can't continue to scale at the level that is required for today's applications and the user expectations, especially with very large files increasingly being shared. So, so what does a hybrid cloud environment look like for file data services? There's a couple key things I want to call out here, and for you to think about. We talk about elegant scale with a system that is multi-cloud, takes advantage of object storage from Amazon, from Microsoft, from Google, any combination thereof. And conceptually, what this is doing is setting up a single global namespace so that organizations have, where they had data silos before, where you might have had, I've got a legacy NAS system in Singapore, and I've got an environment in Los Angeles, and I've got different administration models for each of those. We've had customers that have dealt with dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of these different systems, and all of them have their architectural limits, right? We've all run into that, right? This folder is full. This volume can no longer handle any more folders or files. This directory is at its capacity. All of those limitations go away when you leverage object storage in the cloud, which is quite a concept for most organizations. You're thinking about from a simplicity perspective and being able to consolidate into a single location so that all users see files in a single location. It's quite a game changer. The other thing, like I said, data security. We've got to deal with that. I think the majority of organizations are still, when they're looking at backing up and protecting their file data, you're using a solution that maybe was created 15, 20 years ago to do your file backups, right? Either incrementals or fulls. You're doing replication of those backups. So you've got the old 3-2-1 strategy where you've got multiple copies scattered across different locations. that's a lot of data. In a previous organization I worked at, the amount of data in backups was easily double or triple the actual data in production, right? So it's a huge infrastructure hit for an organization. So now when you think about object storage and leveraging this in the cloud, suddenly you don't have to worry about that, right? Because object storage gives you the capabilities of having immutable snapshots of an infinite number and an infinite number of file versions, right? So that I can easily go back to a previous version for whatever reason. I can bring up a whole other instance if I need to, if there was a disaster recovery or that scenario that I had to deal with. So it really sort of turns the concept of file backup and recovery on its head. And for organizations that move to this kind of a hybrid cloud file model that leverages object storage, suddenly you don't need that software anymore, right? So as you can imagine, that's a significant cost savings. Some kind of pays for itself. So and then the other thing I'll call out here on this slide, when we think about a hybrid cloud file, what makes it hybrid? Well, you have edge devices, virtual machines that can exist in the cloud or on premises, because as was mentioned before, certainly there are data sovereignty concerns, local concerns, compliance, or concerns based on the industry, where the data may or may not need to be, not only in an instance of a virtual machine that lives in a certain location, but it's also leveraging a cloud instance or region that has to be in a certain location, right? So if it can't leave the United States, for example, or can't leave Germany due to EU rules, all of that can be managed. But the important concept here is that by leveraging localized virtual machines as sort of an edge cache, you get high level of performance. You get, dare I say, zero latency. Let's call it near zero latency. Never want to say zero latency, but near zero latency. So it behaves as if it's on premise, because it is on premise, and that effectively, then the information is cached intelligently, so I know what people are using in various locations, and then it is then moved up to the cloud behind the scenes, and all of these versions are kept in sync, and so that there's no file conflicts. And so it basically allows users around the globe to deal with use cases that were previously difficult, right? So it's one thing to be sharing a Word file, and I want to share it with my buddy in Singapore. It's another thing to be to be dealing with an AutoCAD file or a Revit file in working on a large construction projects, or even things like InDesign from Adobe. Some potentially very large files, certainly in healthcare, have to deal with DICOM images. All of these things, require a level of access across a variety of locations, but that performance has to be there for the applications. So any latency that you might have, associated in your mind with, gee, if I put everything in the cloud, it just takes a while to pull it back down, and all these other issues, all that is addressed by having localized edge devices to serve up that information and have it cached locally, so that you don't have to deal with the performance issues that you might normally associate there. So here's an important element of all this, right? So hundreds of organizations have started to move this way. Why do they do it? Why do you care? Really, that's at the end of the day, right? One is, there's a couple of them here, I'll just outline real quickly. One is less storage needed. We talked about reducing your infrastructure, cost optimization, taking advantage of a cloud-first initiatives. If you decided to move to the cloud, some of that the cost reductions from a physical infrastructure reduction are some of the key elements and the reasons why you did that, right? But still, even if you decided to move to the cloud originally when you think about file data, you don't want people copying and moving into different regions, different locations. You'd like to have it all together. Obviously, that has huge benefits from a collaboration perspective. I mentioned also that there's this sort of model eliminates the need for file data backup and recovery software and the associated hardware and infrastructure that goes with that. So that, as I mentioned, has a huge bearing on your costs and your cost model and your budget. Of course, when you get rid of a radically distributed infrastructure model around file data, when you try to simplify and centralize that has a lot of benefits from an administrative perspective, right? You don't have to have the staff and the people working on 15, 20 different systems. You're able to have a single location, single management, and that has huge ramifications from a security perspective and an access control perspective. We talked a little bit around data center reduction and elimination. The other thing is just having a more flexible structure to accommodate hybrid work models, right? With individuals now working 2 or 3 days in the office in many cases, some not, I realize, but there's just this greater need for flexibility. I've got people working all over the place. I need to have that local performance and and what they expected when they were back in the office, and keep things moving quickly, as well as being able to collaborate on very large files or large groups of files, so that the teams can keep working together as efficiently as possible. All of that, of course, has productivity is another cost that you have to worry about. Manpower is a cost you have to worry about. So as you look at the benefits of moving to this kind of a hybrid cloud file data model, they start adding up pretty quickly. I guess I'll just leave it at that. It starts getting pretty significant. All right, so moving on, because we're going to run out of time. There's a number of companies. I want to give you a couple examples of organizations that are doing this. Pernod Ricard. Well, this happens a lot, right? They deal with, geez, we got to worry about downtime and eliminating that, and the time it takes to recover. If any of you have been through an exciting recovery scenario where you have to go get your backups and remount those and bring them back online, you know how exciting that can be. When you're going to immutable snapshots in a hybrid cloud model, that goes from hours and days to literally seconds and minutes. It's very fast. So it's a radical performance improvement that drives a lot of organizations. Wegmans was another example of a company that was caught in the cycle of hey, 3 years have gone by, time to re-up that NetApp renewal, right? And so those days are over. You shouldn't have to do that anymore, right? So when you move to a platform like Nasuni, you're consolidating everything in the cloud. Your recoveries are faster, and your overall operating costs are significantly lower. And there's just one other example. Our buddies at Coke, again, they adopted an all cloud strategy, and they needed a way to integrate file sharing solutions so that they didn't have to deal with cloud latency, because people notice, right? They'll call IT and say, "Hey, what's going on here? It took me 15 seconds to open this file. I expect it to take 2." So you'll hear about it if you've got latency issues. And so you can, by getting off of traditional NAS storage and doing it in a way where you've got localized performance, you don't have to worry about that. The one last section I wanted to talk about here is this idea of cyber storage. And this was a kind of interesting stat from that same Gartner research report, or a similar one, same time frame. And it's kind of shocking. Usually in a Gartner stat, you see like 75% or 80%, but 100% of the storage products by 2020 will include cyber storage capabilities, right? Focused on this kind of an active defense beyond recovery. And that's up from 10% today. That's a spike, right? That's rapid growth. 2028, that's only 4.5 years away. This is going to move quick. And the implications and some of the expectations that are associated with that is this idea of cyber resilience being multi-layered. Increasingly, I think we see this now, right, in the industry, but in cybersecurity, you're never just dealing with one solution to protect your data, to be able to recover your data. You're dealing with multiple layers. And think about your unstructured file data. That is a huge surface area. And there's lots of people accessing that data. So it's ripe for attack and infiltration. So you've got to have something you've got to have a solution for security and for threat mitigation and response that occurs at the storage level. And part of that also ties into our friends in the backup and recovery space. You don't want to have to rely on backups for that recovery. You want to be able to quickly move, because downtime is such a significant that's where your costs are, right? Ransom itself is a pittance, maybe not a pittance, but it's smaller than the impact on productivity and efficiency within the company due to downtime, and to say nothing of the impacts on the business and how the perceptions of your organization, customer satisfaction that goes into that. So what's happening and what's evolving very quickly is that file data storage is introducing a level of detection and mitigation and rapid recovery on its own, and that works in conjunction with other cybersecurity solutions in your environment. I think there's the quote of the day that when I'm talking about this, I called it the quote of the day. This was just the other day, we'll call it 2 weeks ago now. Phil Venables, the Google Cloud CISO, was quoted in Forbes, and he was talking about how, well, I can let you read it here, right? But a big part of security is modernizing away from old legacy infrastructure. Sure, that's true, of course, right? We always want to move on to the newer systems, better security in the cloud, and moving to a more modern infrastructure where security is built in. It's not bolted on after the fact. And that infrastructure is typically a cloud system. You would expect maybe Google to say that, but it is in fact the case where you have the security infrastructure on these systems is incredible, probably better than any of us could ever do on our own on-premises environments. And yet, even with all that said, your data is your data, right? And you're responsible for it, and you're responsible for recovering it in those scenarios. And so, being able to have your file data, live in the cloud, be accessible from those edge devices that we just showed a minute ago, and then be able to not only get the performance from those edge devices, but that's where the protection and mitigation comes in. So that's where someone hits one of those edge devices and a ransomware incident starts to occur there. It's instantly mitigated, stopped there, and then that's where it never gets to the cloud at all, never gets to the master files, and you can also then kick off, warn your security operations team, hey, something happened in this remote location. You can kick off a tool like Microsoft Sentinel from a security incident and event management perspective, and be able to quickly take secondary actions outside of the file system, like shut down access to the Active Directory or do what have you. But so that's a whole other topic. But that's a kind of a basic example of that layer I was talking about, where the storage or the file data storage environment detected an attack before it was seen elsewhere. It alerts the rest of the system. It alerts your security operations team, but in parallel, it then immediately begins within just the file data storage system itself. It initiates a process of recovering those files, going back to the previous known good versions, beginning your investigation work into how this happened, and rapidly recovering those files so that people can get on with their lives despite the attack that occurred. And so it radically lowers and shrinks the blast radius that is associated with an attack. And that, of course, as we all know, I think that's critical, because the longer it goes on, the worse it gets exponentially, and the longer the downtime, longer the cost, longer the recovery would take. So having that sort of early warning system at the edge is absolutely essential. We had a short period of time here today, folks. I appreciate you joining and listening. And Ron, I appreciate the time. I would say that, if you want to start to look into more about this, obviously, you can learn a great deal at Nasuni.com. You can learn lots of other customer examples of how companies are taking advantage of this technology and moving this direction, getting off of old legacy environments, taking advantage of the cloud, taking advantage of all the services behind the scenes of our friends at Amazon, or of course, Azure or Google, or whatever the case may be, even your private cloud providers. So I encourage you to visit us here at this link. And with that, Ron, I will step out of the way.